Yeah, just delighted to welcome a true pioneer to DMLab this evening. Roger Linn's been a key figure in music technology since the late 70s. And I think he's created some of the most influential instruments that have been at the heart of many hit records. Leading the conversation this evening is Martin Delaney. He's been very involved with Drake music in the past. He's a journalist specializing in music technology for Future Music, Computer Music, and Music Radar website. He's also a musician and a LinnStrument player, which I think we're going to talk about a bit. He plays bass with the LinnStrument actually in his band, The Witch of Brussels. He's also a music technology educator as well. So without further ado, I hand over to Martin and Roger.
Thanks, Rob. I guess I should describe myself as well. I'm a older white British man, a little bit older than Rob perhaps. I'm sitting at home today wearing a black t-shirt, and my cat Tina may put in an appearance as she usually does. I also want to explain I have my notes off to the left here, so if you see me looking that way, I'm not reading emails or ordering pizza. So Roger, are you ready to begin?
Yes.
Okay, good. So today we're going to briefly discuss your past works, which we'll get onto in a minute. But really, we want to focus more on, what's happening now, what's happening, with you now, bounce any ideas you might have around what we might do in the future. And then, of course, this will lead us to our Q&A. For everybody else, we have some links that we have shared or we will be sharing. And we have the first link we want to put out there is from the Sound on Sound website, which is a glossary of music technology terms. So if that's just gone into the chat now. So we won't be pausing too much to explain these terms as we go on, but that's a really good resource for anybody who wants to check something out. And specific technical questions also we'll be saving more for the Q&A, I think, because I'm sure everybody will have their own ideas about things they want to discuss with Roger. So Rob's already mentioned some of your history, Roger. It seems to begin with drum machines. Your first drum machine, I believe, was the LM1. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That was the world's first sample-based drum machine. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to create that?
Well, I was a musician and I'm a guitarist specifically, living in Los Angeles. Oh, and by the way, I'm a white man, age 68, and with a little bit of hair left. And behind me in my office is where I develop my products. And you'll see various pictures on the walls, if you're sighted, of, for example, some old gold records of songs that I wrote, and various placards of products that I've created over the years. And yes, the LM1 was the first drum machine I made, and I made it because it was an attempt for me as a songwriter to have a drummer there playing with me the whole time while I was writing popular songs. And there were drum machines of the day, very simple ones, but as Martin kindly just said, the LM1, my first drum machine, released in '79, had samples of real drum sounds. So if you pressed a button on the panel, you'd actually be hearing, if you, for example, hit the snare drum button, you'd be hearing a digital recording of a snare drum. Now, this is very commonplace today, but back then it was very innovative, and people would press the button and they'd jump back in amazement. It's a little bit like the quote from the science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke, who said, "Any technology significantly advanced, I think it was, is indistinguishable from magic." And at that time, a lot of people had that feeling. They would just be amazed when they'd hear a real sound of a drum, a snare drum, a bass drum, a hi-hat, a tom-tom coming out of the audio of this machine. So it was a very exciting time.
Right, and
so that was the LM1. And that was, by the way, used on all the Prince records, the Michael Jackson records, many of the Madonna records, Peter Gabriel in England, and many other bands of the early 80s.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you because according to your website, I think it says on there that you used the LM1 on a Leon Russell album. Is that correct?
Well, it wasn't the LM1. Actually, I used to play guitar in Leon Russell's band. Leon Russell was a musician of the 70s who had long gray hair and wore a top hat and played the piano. And he had many popular songs at the time. One was called A Song for You, one was called Masquerade. And he had kind of a bad sounding voice, but he wrote such good songs and was a very good arranger. So he was popular. Anyway, I worked with him, but then after I stopped working with him, I developed an early prototype of the drum machine that was programmable, but had synthesized sounds, not these sample sounds that the later LM1 had. And so I showed it to Leon, and he said, I'd like to use that on my next album. And so he did. And this is an album called Life and Love. But it did not contain the sampled sounds of the LM1.
Oh, I see. Okay. And then we, as we discussed earlier, we're going to kind of skim through some of these things. You mentioned some of the famous artists to use your machines, and then you have in 1988, we have the LinnDrum MIDI Studio, which was a rack mount device, which I believe only existed as a prototype, but that contained elements that survived and moved into the MPC era.
Yeah, and then there were a few other, there was another drum machine in between called the LinnDrum, and one called the Linn 9000. But in 1985 and 1986, I decided to work on a more advanced drum machine, and that was called the LinnDrum MIDI Studio, and it did some other things as well. But unfortunately, my company went out of business before it could be released. So I think there were maybe 6 prototypes made, and that's it, and the software was never finished. And the reason my company went out of business is that I think I'm a pretty good product designer, but I'm a horrible business person. So I think it's like a lot of musicians, you know, they always get into bad contracts or they manage their career improperly. I learned one good thing from having my first company, and that was what I'm good at and what I'm bad at. And right now my company consists of no employees, just me. But I have some consultant friends that help me occasionally with things that I'm not good at. And I keep things simple. And my ego is in check. I've had good times and I've had failures. And so I found what I'm good at. And I like to stay merely being a designer of products and not much a businessman.
Okay, yeah. And I guess we should just go back a little bit to your first drum machines. Were you surprised at how popular they became?
I was very much surprised and very much pleasantly surprised. It was a very exciting time for me personally, because as a guitar player, I wasn't that good. And so I would try to get auditions with different major artists of the day. And they weren't really interested. And then I found that those very same artists were calling me and wanted to get one of my drum machines. And so it gave me some of the satisfaction of feeling like I had more merit in the world than I did as a guitar player or a songwriter.
I think that's really important, though, you know, what you're saying, because so I think it's very easy to be dogmatic about what you think you ought to do, you know, what you think you're good at. And it's very important to be adaptable to different opportunities. Yeah, that's interesting. And then we're gonna talk about the MPC just a little, because it'd be, you know, kind of silly not to. And this was after your company folded, as you said yourself. And how did this relationship with Akai come about?
Well, there was someone who knew me, but also knew this emerging company called Akai Professional that wanted to make electronic music instruments. And he connected the two of us, and we had some very nice discussions, and it seemed to be a very good fit because I would focus on the things I was good at, designing the products, And Akai would focus on the things they were good at, the marketing, the manufacturing, the sales, the finance. And I didn't have to worry about all those things. I just stayed and worked out of my home in California. And then with the assistance of some additional engineers that I knew in California, and Akai would handle all those other pesky things that I didn't want to do and didn't do very well. So it worked very well. And our first product was called the MPC 60. And MPC stood for MIDI Production Center. And so it was sort of a central machine for your music making. It could make drum beats. It could work via the MIDI standard with synthesizers that you already owned, and you could record parts into it. Of course, it didn't record voices and acoustic instruments. It would just record the synthesized and the drum machine parts. But it turned out being very successful in an emerging new musical style called hip hop that I knew very, very little about. And the hip hop people liked it a lot because it was easy to use, sounded good, but it had what I call an upward path of virtuosity. It was easy to learn, difficult to master. And so people, and I liked the hip hop musicians because they understood beats and rhythm very well. And so the MPC 60 didn't make you think differently. For example, think like a computer. You could just bash those little rubber pads with your fingers and put in the beats you heard, and it would play them back with things like the timing corrected and adding swing timing to them. So they liked it very much.
So how much of the, I mean, the great thing I think about the MPC, I'm trying to think back to when I first saw one, so much of the appeal of it is when you look at it, you kind of know what's going on. You kind of know what it is just by looking at it. And how much, I guess I'm trying to ask is, how did you come up with that interface? Because we mentioned that you had the 4x4 pads on the MIDI studio, but how was that decided on as the ideal kind of layout for the MPC?
Well, this is something I had already done in the product you mentioned, the LinnDrum MIDI Studio. And there was an evolution to that. In the first LM1, it had 2 rows of mechanical buttons to play the different drums. In the LinnDrum, the same thing. In the third product, the Linn 9000, I first introduced these touch sensitive and pressure sensitive rubber pads, and there were 3 rows of 6 each. But ultimately, in the LinnDrum MIDI Studio, the decision for the 4x4 matrix of large drum pads was because the whole control panel of this rack mount device would come off like a big remote control, and you could play this in your lap. And so the 4x4 pads fit very nicely on the left side of this, and all the other controls on the display fit very nicely on the right side of this. So that was one of the design factors.
Okay, so it's kind of a functional.
It was largely, yeah, form follows function, but it turns out to be that it was very popular, this 4x4 matrix of large drum pads, and it was used in many other drum machines as well. And many musicians, very many talented musicians, especially hip hop beat makers, have gotten used to this, and they've developed multi-finger gestures for playing this 4x4 matrix of drum pads.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, if you play a guitar and you want to buy a new guitar, you don't want the new guitar to have a different interface. It became a standard interface.
Yeah,
with people developing gestures for that interface.
Yeah, we still see that layout everywhere, of course, and the MPC name is still going. I mean, it still works, doesn't it? As well as if that's what you want, that interface still works. I mean, are you always very aware of the user interface, the user experience when you design a product?
I am very much so, and that largely comes from my experience as a musician. and also from my impatience as a musician. I had so many days in my younger years where I had bought some piece of equipment and I take it home and I had my little one room as a little recording studio, and I'd have a musical idea in my head and I wanted to go into the studio and start recording the music. And invariably, the product didn't work correctly. It didn't work as people wanted it to work. It didn't work intuitively. It required reading a manual, often written by a Japanese company that didn't focus very well on the use of the English language, my mother tongue. And so it would take me out of the musical experience and make me put on the engineer hat. And I didn't like that. I wanted to record music. I wanted to just be a musician in those moments when I had the musical idea. So it's always been important for me in product design to remember that it's not about the engineering. It's about music and making music and being able to easily make music on instruments that don't take you out of the musical experience.
Yeah, that's very important. I think, yeah, that's a good, I think that's a good way of looking at it, because it's so easy with electronic music to, as you said, to feel like you've become an engineer or you've become a programmer. Or so many times I've personally run into people who say, "Oh, you must," people said to me, "You must really like computers," because I'm using Logic or I'm using Ableton, and I don't. Why would I like a computer? I don't like computers at all. But it's about what they can do for me. And I noticed you said that with the MPC. You said that it was kind of staying out of the way of the user. Is that a fair way
Yeah,
of putting it?
yeah. I think someone once wrote that ideally, any sort of a computing product should become invisible. It's not about the product itself, whether it's a computer or an iPhone or an iPad. It's what you do with the computer or the iPhone or the iPad. And, we've been fortunate because Apple has done a great service to the world in making products that really do consider the needs of the person who's using it. And so they've made appliances. They're not computers, they're appliances that we use for watching content, for reading, for writing, for doing our business work. But they've succeeded very much in making user experiences that don't take you away from your goal of what you're trying to do.
Yeah, very important, I think. Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about the MPC, and then another thing that I was kind of interested in, I must admit, partly because I don't know so much about them, is your Adrenaline guitar pedals.
Mm-hmm.
And this was, am I correct in thinking this was the first product with your new company as well?
Yeah, my current company is called Roger Linn Design, and I did have some early in the '90s a software update from for my old Akai MPC product that I made, but that was not really anything. I was still doing consulting and all that. But starting in 2001, I released this guitar pedal called the Adrenaline. And Adrenaline is spelled with my last name Linn in it. It's an actual misspelling, Adrenalinn. And what Adrenaline did was it was an idea that I had as a guitar player. I saw that all these wonderful electronic music tools were being made for keyboard players, but not really for guitarists. And so the idea of Adrenaline was to produce a variety of rhythmic sound effects that could be applied to any audio signal, but the intent was primarily for guitar. And the pedal had a little drum machine built into it, which of course I knew well from my past experience. And it would do things like there would be a filter tone that would change on every 16th note. So you'd play a normal guitar chord, and instead you'd hear, I can't do it very well with my mouth, but it would do this in sync to the drum beat and change the tone of your guitar, or it would do audio delay signal, dot, 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 but always in sync to the drum beat that it plays. And this was used on a number of records by an American guitar player, John Mayer. It was used by, let's see, the Red Hot Chili Peppers was a band at the time that used it, and others. And but it gave guitar players the ability to tap into some of this world of synthesis in an easier way. They didn't really have to know all that much about synthesizers. They could just select a preset that sounded a certain way, and there were 200 presets. You could select one of a number of them. And so anyway, this was an attempt. It was in large part an attempt to recreate some of the experiences I did in the 70s when I used to work with what were called modular synthesizers, where you have a big rack full of different modules and you connect cables together to process the sound. And the Adrenaline did many of these same things, but all in software and a low-cost pedal.
Yeah, I think it was, I know we've mentioned him already, but I think this is where Leon Russell comes back into it, because I read that he used those original modular techniques on one of his albums, and that's on our, what can you remember?
One thing I say about that is when I worked with Leon Russell, I was sort of a package deal. I would play guitar when he'd go on tour. I would engineer his records, and I also knew all about the technology, especially synthesizers. And so it was very nice for me at the time. I was only about 19 years old, and whenever I would always be on top of the latest technology. So whenever I would find something in the magazines that I found particularly exciting, some piece of audio technology or synthesizer or musical technology, I would tell Leon about it, get him excited about it so he would buy it, then I would get to use it all the time.
Nice.
And
That's a good deal.
And in around 1974 or 75, when I was working with him, I convinced him he should buy a $20,000 EMU Systems modular analog synthesizer. And he did. And I would spend all my time in his studio playing with it and programming it. So it was a very nice time. And that's when I did some of those things that I recreated later at low cost in the Adrenaline.
As I said, I failed to write down what that album was that he used it on, but I heard it today on Apple Music, and it's a very hypnotic, distinctive, and it's still a beautiful sound. You know, it still works really well. I thought that was a really nice, you know, that album's, you know, a few years old now, should we say? But that sound is still very contemporary. And I wasn't aware he was the kind of artist who did that, you see. So that was very interesting for me personally as well. And then we're going to move on. We've got according to my list, we've got the Tempest drum machine as your next landmark. Could you tell us something about that?
Tempest was released, I think, in 2011, and it was a collaboration between me and my dear friend of many years, Dave Smith, who is very famous for analog synthesizer products. He had in the 70s a company called Sequential Circuits, and he made a very influential synthesizer of the day called the Prophet 5, which used analog oscillators and had very distinctive sounds. And many of the synthesizer records of the early 1980s used this Prophet 5 synthesizer. In fact, Dave and I used to joke, Dave unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, but we used to joke that if you ever listened to an old movie, you could pretty much tell if it came from the 80s because it had a bad synthesizer soundtrack consisting of my LinnDrum and his Prophet 5. You know, it smacked of 1980s, right?
Using those sounds is a great way to evoke that era. Is true. Yes.
So anyway, Dave and I have kept up a friendship, and in the 2000s, we started talking about making a product together that would combine our talents. Me from the era of drum machines, or from the area of drum machines, and Dave in the area of analog synthesis. So we decided it would be so nice to make an analog synthesis drum machine. And that's what Tempest was. So we had lots of discussions about it and came up with a feature set and a design that seemed to work. And so I put this into my 3D modeler to be able to create some designs, what the product would look like from different angles and different lighting and all that sort of stuff. And we showed it around to people within Dave's company and also to some trusted customers. And finally got a design that we felt was right. And so I and his company worked together on the engineering and finally came out with it and released it in 2011. And it was very popular. It was expensive. It was $2,000. But over the years, he sold, I think, around 5,000 of them. They were used by a lot of electronic music performers and very creatively. And one of the things I emphasized in the design was that this is a drum machine that was a musical instrument for live performance of electronic beat-focused music. Because I had noticed that many people were making music with computers or machines where they were sitting by themselves alone at home in the dark and using a computer screen and a keyboard. And I wanted something that was more about live performance. So I put in performance features that made it easier for someone to actually create a performance in real time in front of an audience with lots of things that the musician could do in real time to affect that performance, and user interface parts of the product that allowed him to change things very, very quickly. And I was very pleased to find out that when the musicians finally got this, when it's released, the videos they made were all about real-time live performance. So they understood what the intention was.
Nice. You can kind of tell, I guess, from looking at it, because it's, I don't know if we can show an image or we can supply one later, but it's not very focused on a display, which so many products are. It's much more about physical hands-on controls.
Yeah, and lots
here
of
we
them.
go.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah,
Yes,
lots
that's
of
the
them.
time.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. It really does. It's a layout that makes sense for those functions that you're talking about. Yeah, thanks for showing that, Rob. Okay, so that's good. And then I'm trying. There's so many ways we could go with this. I'm trying to keep us on track a little bit. I also have here that you won a Grammy around that time as well.
I did.
Come on, tell us about that, because that's a great achievement, isn't it?
Yes, the Recording Academy has an award. Well, the awards are called the Grammys, and they have a particular class of awards called the Special Merit Awards, where you find out in advance that you're the winner, and they hold this award ceremony at a very beautiful theater in Los Angeles. And then these are things usually for special merit for older honorees. Often people who are about to die, they want to give them an award before they die. They'll even give people awards before they die. And my particular category was the Special Merit Award for Technical Achievement. And they give this to the two of them every year, one for a person and one for a company. And I was the award for a person for my accomplishments with the drum machine and other instruments that I've made over the years. And it was a wonderful event for me. I remember when the president of the Recording Academy called me up and said, well, do you have an idea why I'm calling? And I said, you probably want me to buy a table at a fundraiser for your event, right? He says, no, we're going to give you the Special Merit Award. And I immediately shouted out, yes! And I can imagine him backing away from the phone. It was a very, very wonderful feeling for me, not only for the technical merit, but because I always had such respect for the Recording Academy and had watched the Grammys every year for many years. Because as a musician, this is the highest honor you can get. So anyway, it was very nice. And finally, my wife's parents knew that I was somewhat important. So it was very good in that regard too.
Yeah, I suppose it does tie into your. I mean, I think this is a good thread. Is your activity. You being a musician as well. I think this is an important part of your story, that you're not just somebody who thinks of, has ideas for products, or whatever. You can see them. You look
That's
at
a
it and
very
think,
good.
how's this going to work?
That's a very good point, Martin. I think in a lot of companies, communication ends up hurting the product, or lack of communication, because you'll have people in marketing, and then you have people in engineering, and engineering people tend to design the product for the assumption that all the users are engineers. And so often what will happen is marketing will come up, will talk to customers and get a list of features they want, and they'll give it to engineering and say, make a button for each feature. And that's really not what works. I think it was Steve Jobs who resurfaced an old quote, which is, if you asked, it was from Henry Ford. Henry Ford was asked, do you give customers what they want? And his response was, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they'd say they want a faster horse. And so I think that it's the responsibility of the designer to listen to what musical goals people want, and then use his technical knowledge, or her technical knowledge, and come up with a creative solution that is so good that the musician, when he finally tries the product out, says, I don't think this is something I never would have thought of, but this is exactly the solution I need. And that's what I try to do. I try to say that designers, it's not their role just to make something more and better and bigger. It's their role to step back, zoom out, and look at the total experience and say, what is the solution that the musician is looking for that does not impede his process?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think I'm not going to name any names, but I think sometimes you see when somebody has a new company or a new product, it's come to exist because of their own personal,
Yes.
because of the kind of things you're talking about, where it's their personal idea, or it comes from real world experience, and then as they try and follow that up for marketing reasons with other products, that connection with the real world isn't always there. And I think you're quite clearly able to, that's not you. That's what I'm saying. You're kind of able to overcome that let's call it a temptation, to do something that is out of your lane entirely, but might make some money. It's like you're still focused on the musician, the player. I mean, do you still? Obviously, I've seen you play the LinnStrument, but do you still play guitar as well? I was just wondering.
Not so much anymore. I have a problem in that in my mind, I'm thinking of all kinds of current musical ideas. But when I sit down at the guitar, my fingers have brains that never progressed past the 1970s. And they just tend to play lines from the 1970s. And my real brain is saying, no, stop that. But they have minds of their own. And so at least when I sit down for an instrument, it seems that those brains in my fingers go dead, and my fingers just obey what the big brain is saying.
That's interesting.
And I prefer the instrument because it allows me to make all the new synthesized sounds of today.
Right, and so we're gonna. It's good that you're mentioning the LinnStrument now, because we're gonna talk about that. But one other thing I was going to just put in there as we're talking about interfaces was accessibility again, and how is that something that's on your mind now when you're thinking about interfaces, or is it something you were thinking about, or is it something that's kind of come to you through users, through people asking you about it?
I will admit that when I first worked on the LinnStrument product, it was not foremost in my mind to make an accessible product. It just happened that because I was trying to make a better interface between the musician and the technology, one of the goals was to have more efficient use of fingers. And it turns out that was very useful to many classes of disabled musicians. And I learned about this because of a wonderful organization in the UK called the One-Handed Musical Instrument Trust. And they contacted me and invited me to submit an instrument for their annual competition for the best playable instrument, regardless of it's a mechanical instrument or whether it's an electronic instrument. And so I did. And in 2015, they very kindly awarded LinnStrument the best playable instrument. And they invited me to come to Bristol for their event there, and I did. And it was a very life-changing experience for me because it allowed me to meet many physically disabled musicians and see what their needs are and see that their joy in playing adapted musical instruments. You know, for example, in previous years, winners of their award were someone who made a saxophone for use for people with one hand. And you think about it, you know, saxophones and violins and any other wind or brass instrument, they all require two hands to play, yet they only play one note. And so there are some wonderful designers that have made adaptive wind instruments, adaptive bowed instruments to be played with one hand. Actually, I'm not sure about the bowed instruments. It might be kind of harder. But LinnStrument is a very good adaptive bowed instrument with the help of wonderful software by the audio modeling company, whose chief technology officer is in this meeting today, Emmanuel, or as his friends call him, and he has many friends, Lele. So I'm going to play that in a moment and show you some of the wonderful sounds and tell you a little bit about LinnStrument if you'd like.
Right, great. So can we, before we bring in Emmanuel, hi there, by the way, I'm glad you're able to join us. Before you play, can you just describe how the LinnStrument, you know, what it's made of and how it looks?
Yes. LinnStrument is an instrument that's about, I think it's 25 inches wide by about 8 inches from front to back and only 1 inch thin. So it's a big sort of rectangular slab that sits in front of you on a table, not unlike a MIDI piano keyboard, but it has two major differences from a MIDI piano keyboard. First of all, the notes aren't in the arrangement of a piano, but rather they're in the arrangement of a stringed instrument. And so what this has is there's a playing surface in the center of this rectangular slab that has a bunch of little rubber pads, kind of like drum pads on a drum machine, that are about 3/4 inches square, and they're arranged in 8 rows of 25 pads long. So you've got 8 rows by 25 columns. And you can think of this as like an 8-stringed musical instrument, in that each of the rows is like a string. And just to make that easier, what I'm going to do is select a guitar sound. So what I'm doing now is I'm playing all the notes of one of the top row of this, the uppermost row in pitch. So I have each of the pads is a semitone, just like playing the frets of a guitar. And then I'm playing now on the left side, the lowest note of each of the 8 rows. Now those are musical fourths. So you can tune the rows just like as you would tune a guitar or a cello. You can tune it however you like. But by default, these rows are tuned in musical fourths, like a bass guitar or like the lower 4 strings of a guitar. But you could tune the upper 6 strings as a guitar. You could tune the rows all in fifths, like a violin or a cello, or however you wish, even open tunings on guitar. So that's the arrangement of notes. And the advantage of that is it's, oh, I should say also, there are also lights on the panel that tell you where the natural notes are. each of the little pads has a light underneath it of multiple colors, and that tells you where the notes of the major scale are. So for example, all the blue lights are C, and all the green lights are the remaining notes of the C major scale. And I'm skipping the unnote pads, which are the accidentals, the sharps and flats. For people who are visually impaired, each of the C pads has a braille-sized bump right in the center. So you can feel your way around the playing surface, and you can play other pitches by their physical relation to the C pads. So if I feel this is a C, then I know right above that, a fourth above that is an F, or a fourth below that is a G. And so what I'm now playing is a C major scale on one row, but I could also play that around over multiple rows, just as though a guitar neck was sitting on a table and I was playing a C major scale over 3 different strings. Now, so that's the pitch arrangement, and it's very nice because it's what's called isomorphic. If I play a certain chord, like a C major triad, it's the same fingering regardless of which of the 12 keys I play. And the same thing for scales. Almost got that one. So that's one of the 2 things, differences from a MIDI piano keyboard, is that the notes are arranged like any stringed instrument, as opposed to they are on a piano. And by the way, the reason, well, I won't go into that yet. The second difference is that the surface of the playing surface, pressing the pads, responds not just to how fast you strike a piano key, for example, but also it recognizes your pressure, your left-right finger movement, and your forward-back finger movement. And I'm going to select a different sound for that. And this is a cello sound made by the audio modeling company, which is absolutely phenomenal. So what I'm going to do now is play a C note. So I can press it down. Maybe I'll turn that up a little bit more. I can press that note down, but it also responds to my finger pressure. If I press harder, I get more volume, just as though if you were a cellist, if you bow the string harder or with more velocity, you get a louder tone. So that's pressure, one dimension of. Then the second dimension is pitch. If I wiggle my finger left and right, I get a vibrato, just as though I was performing vibrato on a cello. And if I, just like on a cello, if I slide from a C up to a D, which is just 2 pads to the right, I get a continuous pitch slide. And in fact, I can play a scale that way. And the third dimension is forward-backward, or what, as it's also called, the y-axis. And in this case, I have the audio modeling cello sound set so that this changes the sound based on bow position. So if I play toward the, I'm now going to play a C note, but I'm going to move my finger forward and backward. And you notice how it changes the tone, the timbre. So if you put that all together, you get such a natural, beautiful sound. And And I must tell you that you wouldn't be hearing such a good sound were it not for this wonderful software by the audio modeling company. They are absolute perfectionists, and it sounds better than any samples. And unlike samples, which are just a snapshot in time, this is an actual synthesized sound, which is enabled by software created by Lele, who is on our call, which uses a physical modeling technique. So it isn't limited by samples, which are just snapshots in the time. And for example, if I had a snapshot of a sample of a cello and I bent the pitch in this way, sliding up a distance, it would sound unnatural. It would make it sound like little munchkins if you go up high, and like a sort of a monster cello if you go down low. But instead, whoops, wrong note. So it's a very good pairing. And by the way, the audio modeling company has different software instruments for most wind and all the bowed strings. There's one instrument for each of the violin, viola, cello, and double bass, and there are ones for the reeds, the brass, all the orchestral winds, and all of them are absolutely perfect. So I can play you, if you'd like, I could play a couple of those other wind sounds, Martin.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Here's one that I like very much, which is the, I've always been a fan of the soprano sax. So I'm going to put this back down on the table. It'll make it easier for me to play. It's just beautiful.
Right,
and
that's
such a
nice.
great match for an instrument.
So we'll bring Emmanuel in shortly. We're going to talk about MPE in particular as
I
a
don't want
separate piece. But
I love to sing his praises, but it's okay.
Yeah, no, it's well, I will join you in that shortly. Yeah, sure. But one thing I think is very important to mention with this, again, perhaps in terms of accessibility, but also purely customization with the LinnStrument, is that you can change the layouts and colors that you see on the instrument, and I think this is very important. You know, I use a different system than you have, and I'm very comfortable with that now. So it is very adaptable to different situations. You can, I should also mention that you can split the layout, so half of it functions as a control surface, so people send MIDI CCs or do whatever you need to do with that. And the other thing is, I have personal experience of playing this live, as I mentioned, and it really does work if you're I have some issues post-COVID with like strength and endurance in my arms, and it really is possible to play. If you're a bass player, this just does a fantastic job of coming in and letting you do all your bass parts with one hand. And it means I use my other hand for the controls or whatever as well. But you can really be fully functional as a musician with just using one hand if you have to. And it's really good for that. Rob's decided that's me. That's the other thing we wanted to mention, is that you can wear it. You can attach this to your body with a guitar strap, which I have tried, and it's an interesting experience. So it's very flexible in terms of how you approach it physically as well.
Yes, it comes with 4 little guitar strap buttons that you can attach to the corners, and then play it standing up as you would a guitar or any sort of other standing instrument.
And I guess we should mention there's is it half size? There's a slightly smaller edition of the LinnStrument as well.
Yes, let me get one here. This one is a smaller one. It's called the LinnStrument 128, because instead of having 200 note pads, it has 128 note pads. So it's kind of like, it's really identical to the launch instrument, but only having the first 16 columns of pads and not the remaining 9 columns of pads. But otherwise, it's identical.
Oh, okay. So does that one? I don't remember now. Does that one do the split as well? Can you split that into two halves?
Yeah,
as well?
it still has the same. Whoops, I'm holding it upside down. Yes, it has the split button. Yeah, as Martin pointed out, both of them have a split keyboard function, which is something that's common on MIDI piano keyboards. For example, you want to play the bass in the left hand and piano chords on the right hand, or piano chords on the left and a solo flute sound or something on the right. You can do that, and you can change the split point. So you can decide how many of the pads are used for the left and how many for the right, and then they have different colors.
Nice. So I think maybe I'm going to check in with Rob now. I think maybe we'll call a break now. Does that fit in? And then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about the LinnStrument, and then we'll talk about MPE and possibly MIDI 2, which I know nothing about, I must admit. And we'll talk a little bit more about these excellent audio modeling plugins as well, because I'm a great fan of that.
Another sound from Delaney's wonderful company, Audio Modeling. This is flugelhorn. Part of the trick is to try and convincingly use this expressive touch control of 3 dimensions to sound like the real instrument. And one thing you quickly discover is just having Lele's sounds isn't quite good enough. You have to practice and try to play like the player of that instrument would really play, which is hard sometimes. For example, if I play a violin, violinists would normally use a very wide vibrato. But if you do the same thing on saxophone, it sounds like sort of a drunk musician who's playing at weddings or something like that. So, you know, it's interesting. You can learn to do different things. So here's a few other sounds. I'm going to take some sampled sounds. Guitar type sounds work okay for sampled sounds. So, for example, I played the clean electric guitar before. So here's sort of a rock guitar sound. And by the way, LinnStrument is fully polyphonic with those 3 dimensions of continuous control independently for all simultaneous touches. So, for example, there are some gestures on guitar. I was a guitar player, well, still am technically. Sometimes what you'll do is you'll bend a string like this, or a little bit lower. But while doing that, you'll hold on another string this same note of the destination pitch. You'll slide the lower string into the pitch of the held string. That's one of the gestures that's common on guitar. Another one would be something I used to play a little bit, which is the pedal steel guitar. I was always a fan of the blues harmonica. So here's another sound. Here's, let's see. You can do normal piano sounds as well. And I have a sustain pedal connected in. But unlike an electric piano, I can play a note and then vibrato or slide it to another pitch. It's also very good for, oh, here's upright bass. Let's see.
I think we seem to lose a bit of audio then. Did anyone else?
Yeah. Yeah, I was just going to message you. Yeah.
Oh,
I think it
let's
just
see here. This meeting is original sound for musicians is on. Was it just for that loud sound, or
Yeah,
the?
it was just for your LinnStrument part. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I'll keep going. What I'll do, another sound that's popular is using LinnStrument's expressive control for drums, for playing live drum parts. But not just tapping on the pads. You can certainly do that, and people have done that with drum machines for years. But what I'm thinking of is this sort of a sound where what I'm doing, let me set this up, is I use a feature of LinnStrument called the arpeggiator. Now, this is a common feature for MIDI piano keyboards, but it uses a mode which I first created in my 1984 product called the Linn 9000 called Note Repeat. And what Note Repeat does is when you vary the pressure of a pad, it produces repeating notes of various volume, like this. So I'm just varying pressure, and it's creating, in this case, that's set to create repeated 16th notes with half swing timing. So it's kind of a loose swing. But what I can do in this case is I can use those additional two continuous dimensions. If I tilt my finger left or right, I change the pitch. And then if I tilt my finger forward, the third dimension, I change from a natural sounding hi-hat to a resonant filter sound.
Nice.
And in that case, the frequency of the filter, how high or low it is, changes depending on my finger pressure. Now, that same thing exists for all 200 drums independently. So here I've got a bass drum and a snare drum. And this lowest row has been reassigned, the low row, to controlling the speed of the arpeggiator, the speed of the repeat. So, for example, when I'm using this hi-hat for 16th notes, then if I just press the low row and move my thumb to the right one position, it changes it into 16th note triplets. Or to 32nd notes. So in practice, you can do things like a skilled hi-hat player would. So I'll put these things all together and show you what someone can do to create beats live.
Okay, that's great. That's one thing I haven't done personally as a user. Really nice. That's really nice work. Now
It
listen,
is nice. And it's
we're
something
going to have
people
to.
really haven't done yet. It's good. Sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I haven't really seen that happen. That's something I'll be trying immediately after we finish today. I wish we had more time as well, because I wish we had another hour now, but I need to kind of move on to,
That's fine.
we'll bring in Emmanuel now too, if you'd like to speak as well. Um, and we need to just explain to people what MPE is. I would like it if one of you guys would do that for us. Give us a good explanation of MPE and how and why it's relevant. Obviously, with the LinnStrument in particular, and perhaps in a wider context of expression, and also I'm wondering if there's any accessibility implications for that in terms of
Would you
enabling
like to
people to
take it, Lele?
Yeah. Okay. Hi,
please
everyone.
speak.
Okay. So my name is Emanuele Paravicini, but everyone knows me as Lele, and I'm a big friend of Roger. So MPE, it means MIDI polyphonic expression, the acronym, and is a way to use MIDI to provide independent expression for different notes. So having independent expression for each note. So MIDI 1.0, the first version of MIDI that has been released in 1983, also with the contribution of Roger. The specification of this protocol have several controller and pitch that applies to all notes at the same time. So, for example, the main evidence for this is pitch bend on a piano keyboard affect all the notes. So if I want to bend two notes at the same time, I can use the pitch wheel to do that, but I cannot bend each note separately on the same MIDI channel, we say. So a MIDI channel is, let's say, like the description of the notes that are sent by an instrument, okay? So to allow independent pitch bend and controller, so expression for each note, the MP protocol has been made so that you can use multiple channels, multiple MIDI channels, and use the controller and the pitch bend on each channel to affect the note that is playing on that channel. So,
well, Lele, actually,
yeah.
let me interject, because I think that probably this is a musician's audience, and perhaps some people are not as technical. I would put it in this way: MPE is a way of the same goal as LinnStrument, which is to allow people to have some of the wonderful expressions that they know from wind and acoustic instruments, but to play them for electronic sounds, and specifically to allow that expression polyphonically. So if you're pressing two notes or more at the same time, you get that independent three-dimensional control for each touch. So basically, if you're using something like a LinnStrument or other such instruments that are called MPE controllers, MIDI polyphonic expression controllers, you would want to find a electronic synthesizer that is also MPE compatible, and that way you can just you have a much better ability to plug and play and have them work together.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, for example, in LinnStrument, I set it my normal sounds for MPE, and then I tell people if they buy one of Lele's instruments, they just select the preset for MPE, and then it just works. And that way, when they slide their finger left or right, it changes pitch. And they move it backward and forward, it changes the timbre. The pressure controls the volume. And Now, of course, Lele's instruments are intended to replicate perfectly these wind and bowstring instruments, which are single note instruments. People use them to play solos. And so these are not polyphonic instruments. They're not for playing chords. But that's good, because all those beautiful legato musical transitions are captured perfectly by Lele's instruments. But what he'll do is, if you're sending the MPE, he just says, send me your MPE and everything will be fine. And that works out just perfectly for musicians and for me. And Martin has a comment.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to, we're kind of looking at the time here as well. One thing I'd like to ask, is it Lele? Is that what Roger's calling you?
Yeah.
You could both answer this for me as well. It's really a final thing. I want to bring it back to the issues of accessibility, and your company, Audio Modeling, is very concerned with this issue, aren't you? Can you tell us something about how you deal with this?
We are active on bringing accessibility and inclusivity in our products and also in the community. So, for example, all our products are developed using accessibility implementation, accessibility support. So it means that they are compatible with screen readers for visually impaired users. But also we are involved in the media association with the music accessibility special interest group, that the aim is to provide a standard for making accessible products for the music industry. And we have a vision, for example, also we all know the screen reader can describe the parameters and the interface of a product, but let's admit that is boring, because you have to listen all the list of parameters and so on. So we want to bring, for example, a vocal assistant to these electronic products. So you can speak with the product. You can ask to the product what to do. So instead of reading a list of things that then you have to choose. So what we want to do is to be able to ask to the product and make action using the voice, for example.
And in response to your question, Martin, LinnStrument is a hardware product, and there is no computer software at this time, for which I apologize, that allows people without vision to be able to use all the settings of LinnStrument. But some people have tried to work on that. There's just nothing finished yet. But I will say that after the profound experience of attending the UK's one-handed musical instrument trust event for the award in 2015, I was so moved that I at that point started offering a 20% discount for musicians with a disability that prevents them from, that impedes their ability to play a traditional musical instrument. Now, the only problem with that is that's only when the instrument is bought from my website, which means there's shipping costs, and you still have to have import duty and VAT costs on that. But if anyone is seriously interested in that, they're welcome to contact me. And if they go to my website, which is rogerlinndesign.com, I think someone can post that later, and they're welcome. Any address that you find on that website goes to me. Any email address goes to me personally, because I'm the entire company. And I'd be happy to answer anyone's questions about that and tell them what their total landed cost would be. And this is not an inexpensive instrument. The large instrument is normally $1,500. The small instrument is normally $1,100. And so the 20% discount is off those amounts. So sometimes you find that even buying from a local UK dealer is not that big a difference when you consider all the other costs. But you're welcome to contact me, and I'll figure that all out for you.
Right, good. Thanks for that. I just need to speak to Rob for a minute. Rob, how are we doing for time?
Yeah, so we're just on about 7:30. So, I mean, at this point, we had scheduled for question and answer. I think there's been a couple of questions posted in the chat, some of which are sort of following the thread a little bit. So I can ask those now, but others can have a think. If anyone does want to speak as well, they're very welcome to. Just put your hand up. But yeah, shall I just ask Elizabeth? Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Great to see you here. Elizabeth asked on the thread of kind of expressiveness and MPE. She'd like to hear thoughts about the balance between that and accessibility without it being gimmicky or getting in the way of usability. Elizabeth, you're welcome to add to that following what was just said as well. I don't know if you have anything to add, but yeah.
Well, I can, sure. Sorry about the camera being off. My spoons are very low, and I was like, no one wants to see that. But basically, I've seen a lot of expressive instruments either lack accessibility for those who maybe struggle with fine motor skills, but I've also seen it where there's a lot of expressiveness within an instrument, but how much of that is controlled and how much is that is just, oh look, it can do fancy things if you wiggle your finger. Do you know what I mean? And I was just wondering where that balance lies between something being expressive and being an actual instrument and it being accessible. I hope that adds a bit of clarity to the question, but yeah.
Yes, I'm happy to take that. I would say that the instrument, the musical instrument does not teach you. You have to learn the musical instrument. And adding what we're trying to do, what I'm trying to do with LinnStrument is give the musician a wider palette of expressive performance capabilities. Learning to play a proper vibrato or play with dynamics with pressure, you still have to learn to use those things. I would say the LinnStrument and other MPE controllers, they make it easier because they give you this wider palette and they give you sometimes electronics that helps you. For example, LinnStrument will correct your pitch if you're a little bit out of pitch. But still, to play beautiful music, there's a reason why some acoustic musicians are highly valued around the world, and that's because they have unique skill. So it really depends. I think the more you put into it, the more you will get back. And the accessibility issue, I think, is even if you have a difficulty in one hand, for example, but you can play solos with one hand. On just playing monophonic solos, I mean, all the solos, great solos in musical history are ultimately one-note solos. That's what soloing is. Solo means it's one note, and those are very highly skilled musicians who just took the time to develop that skill, and of course some will have more than others. I will say, though, you don't have to be a virtuoso to be able to get good expressive control. I'm not, and you heard the cello sound I was able to get, or the other sounds. It wasn't as good as a true cello player would be able to do, but I think it takes you a long way towards that. I hope that answers your question.
Can I jump in as well? Hi, Elizabeth.
Hiya.
One of the things, I think on a practical level, one of the things that you'll run into is that if you play something like the LinnStrument and then you're going into some kind of software, that's two stages where you could customize things a lot. So if you can make things much more or less sensitive. As Roger mentioned, you can choose to correct pitch in various ways. So I think there is a kind of a little learning curve in terms of how to customize it to do what you want. But I think by doing that, you can cover a wide range of, performance requirements. Does that help?
No, that's really interesting, and thank you both for your answers. I was mainly asking because I work with a lot of young kids with additional needs, and I find that when you give them something that is expressive or you give them a piece of tech, often they don't and obviously I agree that you have to learn it because it's an instrument like any other. But often, you know, just due to fine motor skills and stuff, they find it fairly challenging. And I think, yeah, it's definitely worth looking at those customizations and learning it like any other instrument. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Elizabeth. And I think many musicians today have been dragged kicking and screaming into the engineering world because it's the only way they could figure out some of these confusing things. But I will say that I have a page on my site called Recommended Sounds. And it has a section near the top that says how to get sounds that best use LinnStrument's capabilities right now. And then below that, there's one that talks about if you're looking for acoustic orchestral winds and strings. And in that case, I just say, get Lele's instruments. And all you do is in LinnStrument, press this button. In Lele's software, select this code. And then it just works perfectly at that point. And so basically, I try very hard to allow people to stay in the musical domain and not into the technical domain. And so in that section on my recommended sounds page where I do recommend sounds that immediately sound good with that, it lists a few synthesizers. I actually do provide a synthesizer with LinnStrument 2 that has already sounds that are optimized. So all you have to do is just select the sound and play. So if you stick with those ones, those sounds, and those are very many sounds, you have really a very wide palette of sounds available that don't require technical skill.
Let's just mention that Surge XT you're talking about, the synthesizer.
That's right.
And,
yeah, there's actually a wonderful synthesizer that happens to be free, and it's highly capable, and I and a few other LinnStrument players have created a library for it that comes with it. And so there's a page on my site that says free Surge XT synthesizer, and it tells you how to press the button on LinnStrument for MPE, what we discussed privately, and then how to select sounds in the Surge XT library for LinnStrument. And then at that point, everything just works perfectly together.
Right, we've got a link direct to the Surge website, haven't we, in our links that we're sharing as well. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I can pop that in. I've also just popped a link to Roger's site as well, so you can look at those resources he mentioned. Brilliant.
Okay.
Yeah, I will say that if you go to my site, just click the support menu, then LinnStrument, and then that will be the LinnStrument support page, and there's a long list of links. Getting started, recommended sounds, learning how to play, the panel settings. So you can learn just about everything you want. And anyone is welcome to email me at any of the email addresses you find there, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So John Kelly, John, are you with us? I can ask. I can invite you to talk, or I can read your question for you. I'll start. John mentions the Kellycaster, which I have here. This is the prototype of an adapted guitar. There's John. Brilliant. Do you want to talk about it, John? And maybe you can talk more about your question.
Yeah, through Drake Music, through DMLab, about 7 years ago, I developed the Kellycaster, which is an instrument that uses a Bella platform with pure data. So we take the messages from the string and take it through pure data, and it goes to a Bella platform. And then I use a Max for Live patch to take each of the string notes and do that. You'd be welcome to have a go on it one day. I'd love you to have a go and give us some feedback on it. My question was similar to Elizabeth's.
Well, yeah. Wait a minute, John. I don't quite understand. How do you play the notes? There's no neck.
Yeah, no, that was the prototype. There's a link to the details on the Drake website, or if you go to my musician's website, it goes. The string detection goes into a Bella platform, which is a little audio interface that is millisecond.
John, can you put that website address in the chat?
Yeah, it's somewhere
I'll dig that out for you, John, if you want to ask a question.
.co.uk, but there's also information on the Drake website about the Kellycaster.
Okay.
But it's
Because I first saw that, I said the Telecaster. I thought, what's the Telecaster?
and what's important about it is it's performance based. So I've always
Yes.
a singer-songwriter. So I play live and I want to jam with bands and want to be able
Yes.
to play along. I'm not Slash or Jimmy Page or anything like that. It's just I'm a folk singer and I like to play simple chords. But I wanted to play more than 3 chords. So the Telecaster was developed with Drake Music about 7 years ago.
Okay.
My question was, I've worked with Drake Music Lab for quite a number of years, and one of the challenges we often give designers is this idea that quite often access is seen as a bolt-on, or it's seen as like a little bit under the bonnet. And I want to be bold and authentic and out there, and not hide accessibility. It kind of makes our sound and our music distinct, and I'm proud of it. So my question is about why you think designers kind of who are developing instruments kind of don't become more upfront with accessibility features. It's still seen as a bit of a bolt-on rather than an intuitive part of playing, if you see what I mean. I believe that accessibility is part of the creative process. It's not a bolt-on, it's part of creativity, if that makes sense.
I can start with this, Lele, if you don't mind. I think a lot of it, John, is just that many of these companies are very, very small. Nobody's got any money, and they're just trying to get something that makes any money back for them because they're trying to make money at their hobby, basically. But I can tell you a quick story. Back in around 1977 or 1978, I was working on early prototypes of my first drum machine, and I happened to know somebody who worked for Stevie Wonder. And I said, would Stevie like to see my drum machine prototype? And this was based on a computer with a computer screen and a keyboard. And you would plug stars in to program the beats and such. So anyway, I went down to Stevie Wonder's studio, and I was very nervous because he was Stevie Wonder. Anyway, so I saw him trying to use this, and being visually impaired, I can see how it was difficult for him to count the steps and to imagine what's on the screen. And what I did is I said, I see now this is just stupid. What I should be doing, this is about music, and I made an instrument that's about vision. And so I went back and I created a way of creating your beats in software and hardware, where I came up with 2 innovations, because the idea was I wanted to be able to hear a metronome and then press the drum buttons, and then when it looped back around, you'd hear the drum beats. But I noticed they were out of time, so I said, how can I make them in time? And so what I did is I created a method called quantization, or as I called it, timing correction. So you would always move your notes onto the nearest 16th note or nearest 8th note, but it still sounded stiff. So I said, how can I make it sound more natural? And by working with many drummers in the past, I noticed that some played with swing timing, you know, like, and some played very even timing, like in Latin music or rock. And so I made this dial that could go anywhere in between. So if the musician didn't have a lot of musical talent, but and also if the musician didn't have vision, they could just play these beats into the machine would clean them up for you a little bit. And it was Stevie Wonder, my experience with him, that inspired me to make something different. Now I haven't always been that good about accessibility, but I do try to include it in my designs.
Brilliant. Just on that thread, Roger, I just wonder, in designing your instruments, do you have a kind of beta testing process where you involve potential users? Maybe you could talk
I do. I have musicians that in my general area here that will come over and try things out and give me their feedback. And a lot of the times I just say, I don't say how it works, and I just say use it and just see if they can. Because that's the ideal case. People often throw out printed manuals. And so I try to get that feedback. And you know, someone said earlier how the designers often just make the instrument that they want to make. I want to do that too, and I have to often resist that temptation. But at the same time, I have to use that passion for making my idealized instrument to be one of the voices in shaping it. And ultimately, by listening to my vision and listening to others, something comes finally into being that serves the musician's need fairly well.
Brilliant. I think that's a really important part of what DMLab and Drake Music is about. As John mentioned, the development of his instrument, it's that feedback loop, hopefully engaging developers with the community, which is kind of what we're really trying to do here from London, and ultimately connecting with others around the world as well. But John's been a big driver in that as well. So, John, did you want to come back on that at all? But sorry,
that's great. Thank you very much.
Sorry. One quick point I'd like to add is that even musicians without any sort of a physical disability have their own accessibility problem. They're not engineers. And as we said earlier, oftentimes the engineers of these companies will make products for other engineers, and they're just too confusing to work. So there's another thing that I would like to compliment Lele's work, is that in a sense his instruments are very accessible because you don't have to read manuals. They just work. And the controls on their panel, they have some MIDI and technical controls, but they also have controls that allow you to do different musical uses, different ways to play a violin, different ways to play a cello or embouchure on a musical instrument. And he puts these interesting modes in, for example, for the wind instruments, if you're playing sax, and you can play to a legato transition between notes. It'll do this wonderful stepped glissando up to the next note, which sounds very realistically how the person would play it on a wind instrument. So part of it is, as I say, accessibility for musicians in that sense.
Yeah, I can add that in our company, most of the members are musicians, so not
Yes.
that engineers or software architects. And also we have a department dedicated to accessibility. So you can write to us, for example, if you are interested, to accessibility@audiomodeling.com. And we have a visually impaired employee that is managing a team of visually impaired users, beta testers. So we try to make our products really accessible in all aspects.
That's brilliant, Leila. And I know you've been working with one of our artists here as well, Jason Descent, I believe.
Exactly, Jason Descent is our consultant, and thanks to him, we have improved the accessibility support a lot, I have to say.
Yeah, I know Jason will probably can make tonight, but I imagine we'll be watching the recording of this. So up Jason and his work as well, what he's been doing. Brilliant. I'll go through some more questions because I think we could talk for a long time. But yeah, Zen had a question. Zen, you're welcome to speak now. I'll just give you the chance. If not, I'll read it for you. Okay. No worries. So Zen asks, what can be done to prevent, and I think this is related to open source, Roger. I'm aware there's some open source element into the instrument as well, but what can be done to prevent other companies and individuals from stealing and reappropriating the products we release as open source? Oh, a bit of an industry technical question there, but yeah.
Well, first of all, the source code alone tends to work very well for LinnStrument. So there's certain things could be stolen, but I don't think they're all that useful to somebody who's trying to make a different sort of instrument. And it is true, Rob pointed out, that the entire source code for LinnStrument that make it the instrument it is completely open source. So anybody, whether they own an instrument or not, can download that from my website. Yeah, that's the answer.
Yeah. That's very generous of you in a way. Is there's something about being open source? Was there a reason for we deciding to make it open source?
Well, I recognized that I was making a very flexible instrument, and there are a lot of very creative musicians who have one foot in the technical world, and they say, this is great, but couldn't we change it to this to make it my ideal instrument, or can you change it to do this to be my ideal instrument? And I recognize that I just don't have the resources to do all those features. And the other thing is, LinnStrument is not a desktop editing system. It doesn't have a big screen and a keyboard and lots of buttons and knobs. It's really optimized to be a musical instrument. And so I decided that opening the source code, and by the way, this is also the idea of the fellow who programmed the software. His name is Geert Bevan, and he's a brilliant man and musician as well. And we decided together that it was best to open up the software, and that way, if someone wants to can create their own ideal musical instrument from it, they are welcome to do so. In fact, Geert has a very nice way of describing this. He says that open source code on an electronic instrument is the modern equivalent of the ability to take a mechanical instrument to a luthier for modifications. As a guitar player, I would change the bridge saddles from plastic to metal, or I would have my frets changed on the neck, or I'd put in larger frets or something like that. And with an electronic instrument, there's this brick wall that prevents you from doing that. And that's what open source allows you to do to a large extent.
Can I ask you a question relating to that, Roger? Would you mind just lifting up the LinnStrument and showing us, because we don't have a display on the LinnStrument. So can you just demonstrate how you edit values, or how you edit, let's say, velocity values on using the lights, so people can see that?
Yes. Well, as you can see, the main playing surface is just consists of the 200 notepads itself, and there are only 8 other buttons that are on the left side, and those buttons are focused on the sort of buttons you'd have on a MIDI piano keyboard, focused on playing music. So, for example, there's a volume button. If you want to change the volume in your external synthesizer, I should point out something I should have earlier. The LinnStrument has no sounds itself. It just puts out the MIDI information, and then it can be used with any MIDI synthesizer, either hardware or software. So if you, for example, want to change your volume while you're performing, you press the volume button, and it would send out MIDI messages that tell the external synthesizer to play louder or softer. And then here's a button here called Octave Transpose. This allows me to change the octave that I'm playing in, or to change the pitch for transposition, or to move the lights around. So the lights are in such that if I wanted to have C down in the bottom left corner, for example. And then there's split mode. So you can quickly change the split mode and then change the split point. And then you'll also notice that there are many printed settings on the front, or on the back, the rear edge, and on the front edge. And in each case, let's see, to show you quickly too, there are up to 4 printed settings there. And what those are, this button here is called per split settings. And what happens is when I press that, all the pads now become control buttons for the printed settings. And there are 4 printed settings above each column, and the 4 lights immediately below that show the status of those printed settings. And the same thing on the bottom for global settings, and these apply to everything in the device. And so, for example, I can change here the tuning of the different rows to guitar tuning, or all musical fourths, or fifths like a cello. And then you can do things like, if you're giving a performance and you want to thank the audience, or you want them to applaud, you press this button. So there's a few little Easter eggs in there too. But basically the idea is, I didn't want to put a big screen on it. because I wanted to make it not a detailed editing machine, but rather something for a musical instrument for performance. So you can actually access all the deep controls in LinnStrument, but without a screen.
Can I say the one thing I was concerned with at first, because I have, as I've told you, I have very bad eyesight, was that the buttons and the text around the buttons is very small. But then I found there was quite a successful trade-off because of the way you use the lights to enter the values. I found that there's a little muscle memory in knowing where the octave button was in particular. That always seems to be the one. So yeah, it turned out to be, it was, like I said, that was an initial concern, but I felt in the end I was kind of happy that it's a good trade-off not to have to deal with a display and not to have to deal with a software editor, I thought.
It's interesting because we put in all the MIDI communication so that anyone could write a software editor if they wanted to. But the trouble is, when people would buy their LinnStrument, they wouldn't need it. They found that the system we have of editing settings is fine, and they didn't need an external editor.
I think we'll move on to, I think this is our final question. I think one has been answered in the chat already, but maybe we can touch on that. But this is from Hugh, who works with Drake Music. He's an instrument maker, doing a PhD in developing accessible instruments using AI. But he can't talk at the moment. He's not got a connection to a camera or mic, but he asks, what is your process for creating initial prototypes or proof of concepts of new instruments?
Well, first of all, my company is very small. It's just me with the occasional help of consultants and friends that I know in the area. So I have to do everything on the cheap. And so when I was first developing LinnStrument, I had to come up with a sensor mechanism, a sensing technology, and it took me a long time to do it. So what I used cheap hobby tools. For example, the Arduino hardware boards and their software. I used that, and then ultimately the open source software is in the Arduino format, so it makes it very easy to use. And the Arduino, which was developed near Lele in northern Italy.
Turin.
Arduino, yeah, Arduino. He was some sort of a warrior in ancient times, I think. Arduino. And so what I used was the Arduino, and then I used some of these hobby boards that you can buy at hobby companies where you put components in it and you connect them with wires and such. And if anyone is really curious about that process, you can go to my website, and from the LinnStrument support page, there is a section called, let's see, hold on a second, what is it? About the design. And there's there's one link there that says how the sensor works, and it shows pictures of my original prototype using the Arduino, and talks a little bit about my process and how I was able to develop it on the cheap. So if you have the talent and you know a little bit about hardware, you know a little bit about software, then these days it is a wonderful time to be alive, because these tools like the Arduino and the many different option boards for it, and different components that you can attach to it, and the different software available on the web, there's a wonderful community, make it so much easier to do these things. And then here's another example. At the time, I used the hardware circuit for the Arduino board called the Arduino Due. Due means two in Italian. And but it didn't send and receive MIDI over USB. And so I looked on the web, and there were two guys in Galicia, Spain, the Galicia region, northwestern region of Spain, that were trying to make a electronic Galician bagpipes. And so they had modified the open source code for the Arduino, one of the two chips on the board, and added MIDI capability. So I just sent them an email and said, could I use the software? And I'm happy to pay you for a little bit. And they were just thrilled, and it was a wonderful collaboration. So often you find out that some of the software you want is available either open source free or for a low cost, and you can add these little bits and pieces together to make what you need to be made. So then once I had a prototype, and that prototype is shown on the website, then it's just a matter of doing things as cheaply as possible. And that's where it gets into more larger company stuff. For LinnStrument, I had to make a metal box, I had to make circuit boards, I had to make the silicone rubber touch surface. But there are tricks you can use. Like I needed these nice rounded corners which make LinnStrument not look like the rectangular metal box it is. So I went down to a wood yard, and they had these long strips that were 6 feet long that people use for wainscoting, where you put against the walls of older homes so the chairs don't bump. And so I bought a bunch of these and just cut them up and drilled holes in them. And the point here is that if you can piggyback onto things that exist in the world in large quantities already, and you can piggyback on their lower cost and economies of scale, then try to do that. Another thing is the LinnStrument is very thin, but the MIDI jacks in there's 2 round MIDI jacks. No one makes a MIDI jacks that's thin enough. So I used standard MIDI jacks, but when I manufacture, I just clip the tops of it off so it'll fit in the 1-inch chassis. And so it's okay to do things on the cheap, and just use your intuition and think, how can I do it cheaply? And ultimately, if it works, it works.
Brilliant.
I would also say that if you have any particular questions about that and you'd like to go into more depth on that topic, you're welcome to send an email, and I'm happy to share my knowledge.
Well, Roger, that is a really lovely note to end on. Thank you so much for your generosity and time. And thank you also for joining us, Layla, as well. It's been really good to have you here with us. And of course, Martin, for leading the conversation. It's been super, super fascinating.
Thanks,
yeah,
everybody.
real inspiration. Sorry, Martin, going, yeah.
I was just going to say thanks, everybody. It's been great. I wish we had more time.
Yeah, we could talk for a while, I think. But also big thanks to Rachel, who's been working hard interpreting the whole event for us. Thank you. And also Heather as well on the captions. Yeah, I hope it's been a real enjoyable evening for everyone.
And thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a great pleasure. And Martin, Rob, and Rachel did an excellent job, I think. I can't tell because I can't read sign.
Yeah, brilliant. I've just popped in the chat just a very quick feedback form. As mentioned, events like this, we rely on funding for, and we have to report back to funders, but it also helps inform our future sessions. So please, 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 if you do have 1 minute, it's really quick, tick boxes and leave a comment. That'd be lovely feedback for Roger and everyone as well. On the event. It's very, very easy. I promise. It's not, it won't take much more of your here in the UK. It's pancake night. I don't know if the same in the States. It's Shrove Tuesday here, so everyone's making pancakes, I believe. But yeah. But yeah. Oh, Nick's eating too many already. Good work. I need to get some pancakes down me. But yeah, thank you very much again. Yeah, Roger, absolute pleasure. Really, really can't thank you enough for being here this evening, and hopefully we can keep in touch with Drake Music as well.
My great pleasure.
Brilliant.
See you. Goodbye to everyone.
See you soon.
All right,
Thanks, Roger.
all.